Help. Help. My spouse does not want to move to the country. This is why it says this. Educate our people to get out of the cities into the country where they can obtain a small piece of land and make a home for themselves and their children. And as you go through the book Country Living, you'll see quote after quote after quote on this. We can't be living in the cities. We are not going to be saved in the cities. You understand that? If you're living in the cities, you're going to be killed by the demon-possessed people. You know, I don't know if you've ever watched a zombie movie. Okay? If you ever watched a zombie movie and all these half-dead people, it's going to be like that. You're the only sane person and everybody else is demon-possessed and they're out to get you. You can't live in the cities. You will not survive in the cities. God cannot provide for you in the city. You've got to obey the counsel and get out of the cities. Okay? God knows what it's like because he already knows the future. He knows how terrible it is. And he says the only way of surviving is get out of the cities into the country, get your own land, be independent, self-sufficient, so you don't have to eat their junk or drink their water. It's the only way to survive. There's no compromise with the truth. So you can have a really large piece of property, but you have to factor in being out of debt. Okay? It's better to have a smaller piece of property and be out of debt. Okay? It's better to have a smaller piece of property and be able to buy everything you need for that property. Okay, because you can say, oh, I'll get a medium-sized property then. But if you've got a medium-sized property and out of debt, but you still don't have enough money to put $75,000 worth of solar system on your roof or to dig your wells or to plant all the trees that you want in and so forth, then it's pointless. Have a small piece of property and get everything you need on that small piece of property. Okay? So this is what we do. But you know, the thing about God is that he never works against our free will. He's not there just controlling. He's not going to drag you into the country if you don't want to go. He's going to tell you what's best and show you the way, but he cannot make you go. You need to go. You need to trust him and take that step of faith. You know, moving to the country is going to teach you so much about faith. You're going to learn so much. He will ask you to take step after step into the unknown. And it's going to teach you to trust God and trust him, because we've got to get to a point where we trust God implicitly. He will just say something, and even though it makes no sense, we say, well, God said it. I'm going to go and kill my son like what Abraham did. You know? It made no sense. But because he believed in the voice of God, he did it. Or was prepared to do it. So God allows us to make our own decisions. And even with our spouses that we've married, they're independent people. They you know, if you're married, you know the deal. Your spouse has a will of their own. And all the men are like this. But it's not just the spouse we have to think about, okay? There are other people in the factor as well. So even though we're talking about spouse, it's also going to be your parents and your children. What if your parents don't want to go? Because some of us as children are responsible for our parents. We've got to take them to the country. And we have kids. We've got to take them to the country. How are we going to do this? Okay, how are we going to do this if they don't want to go? For example, let's take a look at the story of Noah. You remember the story of Noah? Okay, there's something interesting about the story of Noah. I hope you've noticed it. Okay, it's to do with the age of his children. Have you noticed it? How old was Noah when he had had Shem? 600 years. Was it 500 years? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So Look at where is it?
Age of
Birth.
humanity. It's down. Number 10. Age of eternity. 500.
Generation 10.
Yeah. Okay. So let me put this in another chart for you. Okay. These are the lifespan, and as you can see, most people have their kids around the 100-year mark. Okay. Some bit longer, some bit shorter. Okay. And then there's Noah, all the way down here. All the way down here. Have you ever wondered why it took him so long? it's just so smarter. Let me tell you another idea. We do not know. We do not know. Okay. Let me give you something to think about. Okay. I speculate, note the word speculate, that Noah also had children around the 100-year mark. But they chose not to go in. I speculate that Noah had children and grandchildren and great grandchildren, possibly even great great grandchildren. And they decided not to go in. I believe Noah built his ark and he had a room for his children, all his children and their families and their grandchildren. And he had it all planned out. But they decided not to go in. I believe that Noah was preaching and preaching, but he's preaching to people he knows. He's preaching to his brothers, his literal brothers and sisters. He's preaching to cousins, nieces and nephews, uncles and aunts. He's preaching to people he knows well, people he played with, went to school with, hung out with, has Thanksgiving meals with. He's preaching to those sort of people, and they chose not to go in. Shem and the last three boys, or these three boys, were the only ones who believed Noah. We do not know why there's this gap. We can sit down with God and ask him. But this is what I speculate. This is what I speculate. So we don't know. But this is what I speculate. Okay? I just want to speculate. And I can see why, when Noah comes off the ark and he sees nobody. Nobody. Remember, before he was used to seeing all his relatives and he sees nobody. That's going to hurt. I can almost understand why the brother got drunk. Because he saw nobody. Yeah. It's only speculation. Something to think about. But Noah was a preacher of righteousness, but he just couldn't convince all his family to get on board. This is part of the emotional preparedness that we have to do for the end times. He just couldn't convince them. Desire of Ages. Those who had faith in his message for their time and who acted out their faith in obedience to his commandments escaped the judgments that fell upon the disobedient and unbelieving. The word came to Noah, "Come thou and all thy house into the ark, for thee have I seen righteous before me." Noah obeyed and was saved. Noah's salvation was dependent upon his obedience. He was saved simply because he was willing to obey, even though so many of his relatives thought he was crazy. Even so, God commanded Noah, "Come thou and all thy house into the ark, for thee have I seen righteous before me in this generation." His influence and example resulted in blessings to his family. So, because Noah heard the voice of God, and all we know is that it was only Noah heard the voice of God. Okay, we don't know about Mrs. Noah or the rest, but because he was familiar with the voice of God, his relationship and his willingness to obey was a blessing to his family. His obedience was a source of blessing to those who were unable to hear God's voice. God saved all the members of his family with him. Now let's look at another story. Let's look at Lot. Okay, Lot. The message came to Lot, "Up, get you out of this place, for the Lord will destroy this city." Genesis 7 and 19. Lot placed himself under the guardianship of the heavenly messengers and was saved. Okay. He heard the message, he obeyed, and was saved. I won't go into Lot, but any more than that. The Christians during the destruction of Jerusalem, how were they saved? Understanding the prophecy of what Jesus said, and when they saw the sign, what did they do? They escaped and fled. So Christ's disciples were given warnings of the destruction of Jerusalem. Those who watched for the sign of the coming ruin and fled from the city escaped the destruction. You know what's happening? A storm is coming. A storm is coming. Mrs. White says this: a storm is coming. The storm is coming. The storm that will try every man's faith or what sort it is. Believers must now be firmly rooted in Christ. Not later, but now. Or else they will be led astray by some phase of error. And again, she says this: a storm is coming, relentless in its fury. Are you prepared to meet it? You can't escape it. You're going to face it. You need to be prepared. So this is like a warning, a danger sign. You got to say, okay, when you hear the warning. So you may have. Do you have tornado warnings? Okay. Earthquake warnings. Okay, earthquake warnings. You have earthquake warnings there. We'll have hurricane warnings in Florida, and in some places tornado warnings. So you have these warnings, and if you ignore it, you lose your life at your peril. Sorry, alligator warning. Please, please. And like in Florida, unless it's a Cat 4, we ain't doing nothing. It has to be at least a Category 4 before we move. But this storm that is coming is relentless in its fury. It's relentless. It's going to destroy so many people. And it's coming. Ms. White says this: so now we are given warning of Christ's second coming and of the destruction to fall upon the world. Those who heed the warnings will be saved. Those who heed the warning. God has some people he's going to save. God has some people. God has some people. But not everybody's going to be saved. Not everybody. Matthew 22 verse 14 says this: many are called. Many are called, but few are chosen. Think about your church, your churches. In my church, there's Avon Park Church and the surrounding churches. There's probably like 2,000 Adventists in the various churches. the main church, the Filipino church, the two Spanish churches, the black church, just in Avon Park. Okay, then Frostproof and Sebring as well. Maybe 2,000 plus members. But there's only like 50 of us who worship together. Many are called, few are chosen. Few are chosen. Is God kind of capricious with who he chooses? Well, I don't like you. I'll take you. No, no. Is it? No. Is that the way God is? No. Ezekiel 18, verse 32. Let's just be clear about God. For I have no pleasure in the death of him that dieth, saith the Lord. Wherefore turn yourselves and live ye. Why die? God wants us all to be saved. So, when it comes to our households, we understand that there's going to be a shaking. We went through that a little earlier on. And this shaking, even though it's a church thing, the church is shaking. The shaking first starts in homes. Okay, and we're starting to experience it, as I was saying before. Okay, starting to see the effects. Homes being split up because one wants to move, another doesn't. One sense the urgency, another doesn't. Okay, and they both go to church. They're both church members. Jesus says this in Matthew chapter 10. Think not that I have come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. For I am come to set a man at variance against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law. And a man's foes shall be they of his own household. Jesus, this is what if you think you're going to have a peaceful life, forget it. The gospel doesn't do that. The gospel causes separation. And then I forgot to change this text. I think it's Matthew chapter 12. He that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. And he that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And he that taketh not his cross and followeth after me is not worthy of me. He that findeth his life shall lose it. And he that loseth his life for my sake shall find it. So within our home, we're going to find strife. But we've got to love God more than we love our friends and family. Okay? Which is hard. How many of you are fathers here? Do you remember holding your baby for the first time? And the awe and amazement you felt holding this little bundle of life in your hands. Ladies, do you remember the first time you felt that baby move in your womb? Do you remember it? And you thought, oh, it's real. You knew you were pregnant, but suddenly it kicks in when you feel it move. Okay, you feel it really is there, and you're amazed, and you have this incredible love for this child. It's an amazing amount of love for this child. You do. But God says, you've got to love me more than that. Don't diminish your love for anybody else. Just learn to love me more than that. More than that. Now, when probation closes, if it closes and you do not have the seal of God but the mark of the beast, your ability to love comes to an end. Because love is of God. Because God is love. So when you reject God, you reject the ability to love. Satan is incapable of loving. Satan and the demons hate each other. The only thing that keeps them working together is because they hate God more. Yeah. But as humans, if our probation closes and we receive the mark of the beast, we have the character of Satan, we cannot love. So just think about it. You could have a spouse who you sacrifice, compromise, trying to win them and keep this relationship going. And you keep on compromising and compromising and compromising your faith with God. And then when probation closes, this spouse is going to turn around and hate you to your face. They will hate you with every fiber of their being. They will utterly despise you. Do you understand what I'm saying? There's no point in trying to save a relationship when the end result is that they are going to hate you. The only relationship that you can rely upon is your relationship with Jesus Christ. That's the only steadfast, sure relationship. And in your mind, in your emotional preparedness for the end time, you've got to be saying at all times, maybe my wife may not make it. I've got to be prepared to leave her and pursue Jesus. Maybe my kids or my grandkids will choose not to come. Talk about grandkids. I have to be prepared to leave them. I know it's hard, but it's the truth. Matthew 24, verse 12. And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold. It's going to wax cold. It's going to be so cold. So what do we do about loved ones who are not prepared to get on board with our move to the country? Okay? You have to have two plans. Plan A, plan B. Okay? Two plans. Plan A and a plan B. Plan A. You pray and fast. There's no point nagging them. You've got to pray and fast and pray, and beseech the Lord that the Lord will work in their life, disturb them and trouble them, cause them to see something that they will get on board, okay, or be at least willing to get on board. You've got to pray, 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 pray. That's your plan A. That's your plan A. Pray and fast. Okay? Let's talk about plan B. Okay? And with plan B, we're going to break it down into the three areas: your spouse, your children, and your parents. Okay? What if they don't want to get on board? Okay? So, what if your spouse is not on board? And this is a very real reality. Even Paul recognized it. If you remember 1 Corinthians chapter 7, it says this: But to the rest speak I, not the Lord, if any brother hath a wife that believeth not, and she be pleased to dwell with him, let him not put her away. And the woman which have an husband that believeth not, and if he be pleased to dwell with her, let her not leave him. For the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife. Do you understand what that means? If your husband is willing to go with you to the country, and even though he's not a believer, he says, okay, I'll go with you. Okay, go and find some place. And you go to the country, your godly life can influence him to salvation. And the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. Else were your children unclean, and now are they holy. But it goes on to say this: But if the unbelieving depart, let him depart. A brother or a sister is not under bondage in such cases, but God hath called us to peace. For what knowest thou, O wife, whether thou shalt save thy husband? Or how knowest thou, O man, whether thou shalt save thy wife? So if they're willing to live with you, let's go with it. Let's go with it. Okay? But if they are out and they leave you, if the unbeliever leaves you, you can't hold them down. You can't hold them down. Okay? Now, if you're the man in the relationship and you have an unbelieving spouse who's willing to live with you, but they don't really want to go to the country, you need to lead. You got to lead. You've got to be the man of the house. Okay? You've got to be the head of the house. And the head of the house means you have to be the spiritual head of the house. You can only lead your spouse if you first are led by God. You've got to be the spiritual leader, and you've got to lead your spouse and say, this is what God is telling me I should be doing. I need you to come along with me. Okay? And you've got to lead your spouse if you're the man. This is what God says about Abraham. For I know him, that he will command his children and his household after him. Note the word command. Abraham is going to tell his family, hey, Sarai, I know you're comfortable in Haran, but I want you to pack up because I'm selling everything and we're leaving. And she says, so where are we going? And he says, I don't know. But God's going to reveal it on the way. And she says, at least in my version, she says, okay, honey. You know it was a long conversation, don't you? You know it was a long conversation he had. But he knew the voice of God. He was a spiritual leader. He had a relationship with God, a relationship that his wife knew that he had. Okay? And she was willing to step out into the unknown. Even though God did not speak to her, she knew that God spoke to Abraham. That's why it's so important for men to have an incredible relationship with God. And if men have an incredible relationship with God, then virtually every godly woman will follow a godly man anywhere. They will. You tell them, Gloss to call me to Timbuktu. Really? Okay, I'll start packing. You know, if you're a godly man, a godly woman will follow you anywhere. I pray that you've picked a godly woman. Okay, but if you have a godly woman, she will follow you anywhere if you are a godly man. Now, if you're not a godly man, she's going to question you every step of the way. Okay? But God knew Abraham, and he knew Abraham will command his household after him. Think about what Joshua said. Joshua 24, verse 15. What did he say? As for me and my house. He's speaking not just for himself. He's saying, I know my house is going to do what I'm telling them to do. We're going to serve the Lord. Okay? He was speaking on behalf of his house. He was leading his house. Okay? Now, in that situation, wives, if you have a godly man who's leading you, you know what you need to do? Submit. Submit to spiritual leadership. Okay? If you have a godly man leading you, you need to submit to spiritual leadership. Okay, there's no objections. Let's move on. Oh yeah, but these are just pulled off the internet, please. Okay, it just pulled off the internet. Okay, but I'm glad you noticed it. Ephesians 5:22. Wives, submit yourselves unto your husband as unto the Lord. As unto the Lord. And then in Colossians, the same thing. Wives, submit yourselves unto your husband as it is fit in the Lord. So, men, if you're in charge and you want to move to a country, and your wife is an unbeliever, is not convinced, you need to lead and you need to say, "Listen, honey, this is what we're doing. Okay, please get your head around it. I'm going to bring you on board. Let's choose a house together, but we're moving to the country." Okay. Now let's look at the other situation. Wives, when your men don't want to move, what you're going to do? Now, first of all, ladies, tell the truth. Tell the truth. You know how to influence your husband, don't you? See, all of you smiling because you know how to influence. You know what to do. Okay, so you're gonna have to sit down and put together a plan. Okay, because you know how to train your husband. Okay. Yeah, I think this is from the movie. Okay, you know what you need to do in order to influence your husband. Now, it's not going to work with every husband because some husbands are just so far gone that they are just going to rebel against anything you do. But you are going to do all within your power, within the charms that God has given you to influence your husband to move to the country. And I know it's difficult. I know it's difficult. And this is a great book I read, How to Lead When You're Not in Charge. Okay? This is what we're calling you to do. We're calling you to lead, even though your husband is leading. We're asking you to be as influential as you can be as a leader without usurping the power of his headship. Okay? You know how far you can go with your man, don't you? You know that. Okay? All I'm asking you is to do what God has given you to do because you know your man. You know your man. Okay? For example, Abigail in the Bible, gorgeous woman, the Bible described her, phenomenally good looking, but she was married to an awful man. Okay? A miserable man. But she knew her man. Amen? And she knew how miserable he was. And she went around behind his back, okay, and saved his life. She she knew her man, and she knew the best thing to do about it. Because she didn't tell him, she waited till he sobered up and then told him. And then he had the heart attack. 1 Samuel 25, 18 and 19. And she said unto her servants, Go on before me. Behold, I come after you. But she told not her husband Nabal. Then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves and 2 bottles of wine and 5 sheep and sheep ready dressed and 5 measures of parched corn and 100 clusters of raisins and 200 cakes of figs and laid them on asses. But it came to pass in the morning when the wine was gone out of Nabal, and his wife had told him these things, that his heart died within him, and he became as stone. And it came to pass about 10 days later that the Lord smote Nabal, and he died. Okay, the whole killing part, I don't want you ladies to dwell on that. I really don't. Okay, I really don't. But the whole thing about her knowing her husband, even knowing when to speak to him, is important. Okay, she knew how to get the best out of her neighbor. She knew what he was capable of, how far to push him, and when to speak to him. We've got to be wise like Abigail. Mrs. White says this: the Lord will work so that the disaffected one will be separated from the true and loyal one. So in some situations, listen carefully, the person you married isn't going to be saved. And the Lord will separate you from them so that they will not jeopardize your salvation. You understand the point I'm making? God wants to save you, but your current spouse is a hazard to your salvation. And God, because he wants to save you, will separate you from your spouse. Please know, God will separate you. You won't do it. God will do it. They will say, you know, honey, I want a divorce. I'm leaving, whatever. Okay? I know of some cases, ladies I'm working with, who are going through this very same thing. It's not an isolated thing. I'm telling them they're going through the sifting, and God loves them so much that he wants them to be saved, and that the only way to save them is to remove the hindrance to their salvation. It's not easy, it's not pain-free, but it's necessary. And for those people, God doesn't abandon you. He creates new families for you. He creates new families. Ruth found a new family, didn't she, when her husband died? In Naomi. She found a new family. God creates new families. He doesn't just leave you. Psalm 68 verse 6 says this in the New Living Translation: God places the lonely in families. He sets the prisoners free and gives them joy. God places the lonely in families. In Matthew chapter 12 verse 47 to 50, then one said unto him, Behold, thy mother and thy brethren stand without, desiring to speak with thee. But he, that is Jesus, answered and said unto him that told him, Who is my mother, and who are my brethren? And he stretched forth his hand towards his disciples and said this, Behold, my mother and my brethren, for whosoever shall do the will of my Father which is in heaven, the same is my brother and sister and mother. Okay? In other words, God's going to create your family for you. What you're losing for God, God is going to place you with people who are of like mind. And this is why camp meetings are so important. Because you may leave a spouse to come to camp meeting, and you're going to connect with other people who are going to be your new family. You're going to build up friendships and bonds with people, and they're going to take you in when you are all alone. God will create a new family, and they will be closer to you than your own blood relatives. And for this to happen, just a word of advice, you need to have a vision board about your move to the country. You're moving single. Okay, this is what I want. You need to start planning with others, because you may not be able to afford it or whatever. You say, well, Lord, I'm by myself. How am I going to do this? Start connecting with other people and start planning together. And then start learning useful skills that can be used at the end times, in the end times. Learn how to garden, learn how to cook or preserve food, learn how to construct something, build something. It's something practical, okay? I don't know if we need lots of artists, but something, understand, something practical. Learn how to sew or bake cakes or make bread or something. Use a tractor. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about children. What happens when your children don't want to get on board? Okay, I got some good biblical advice which you are not to follow. It says this, Deuteronomy chapter 21. If a man have a stubborn and rebellious son, which will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and that when they have chastened him will not hearken unto them, then shall his father and his mother lay hold on him and bring him out unto the elders of his city and unto the gate of his place. And they shall say unto the elders of the city, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard, and all the men of the city shall stone him with stones. Think about it. I'm not advising anybody to do this. I understood. But the parents were to value the reputation of the nation, the reputation of their family so highly that they were prepared to give up a stubborn and rebellious son. Not to accommodate it, but to sacrifice it, to surrender it. I don't see this nowadays. I know people who say, well, I used to be against LGBTQ, but then my son became homosexual, and I see things differently now.
Let's call theological erosion. Theological erosion.
Yeah. Because they weren't prepared to do this. I have more respect for the person who says, yeah, you know, I have very little to do with them. Okay? I have more respect for them than to appease it. You know what appeasing reminds me of? It reminds me of Elis and his sons. Remember Elis and his son? 1 Samuel chapter 2, it says this, wherefore kick ye at my sacrifice and at my offering, which I have commanded in my habitation, and honorest thy sons above me, to make yourself fat with the chiefest of all the offerings of Israel and my people, Israel, my people. So, you know the situation, what Eli's sons were doing. They were upsetting the worshippers who were coming. The people had their sacrifice, and they said, we're tired of boiled meat, we want roasted meat. And they were demanding the meat even before the fat was burnt off or anything like that. And it was really upsetting the people to the point where the people weren't coming to worship as a result. And on top of that, these married men were sleeping with some of the women in the temple as well. Okay, this was what was and Eli, the father, knew about it and did nothing to restrain his sons. That's why he was honoring his sons above God. And sometimes we can do the same with our children. We can do the same with our children. We allow them to get away with things that should not be allowed. That should not be allowed. We know what is right and what is wrong. But when it's our children, it's like, well, it's only little Johnny. He's so cute. And I love him so much. And we allow this to go on to their detriment and to their soul salvation. This is why it says this. Oh, what an account such parents will have to render to God. They dishonor God and show all honor to their wayward children, opening their doors to amusements which they have in the past condemned from principle. They have allowed card playing, dancing, parties, and balls to win the children to the world. At the time when their influence over their children should be strongest, bearing a testimony of what true Christianity means. Like Eli, they bring themselves under the curse of God by dishonoring him and disregarding his requirements in order to gain the favor of their children. So if your child doesn't want to move to the country, you know what I say? Unless they're moving out, they're moving to the country. They're moving to the country. I don't think there's a this. They don't have a say in it. Do they? I say to my children, "You pay bills up in here." It reminds me of a family that moved into our area recently. They moved from the city of Lakeland, and before they moved, this is Asia Hill. They would come visiting the area as they were preparing for the move. And we asked Asia, so what do you think about moving to the country? So, I don't like the idea, and she was really against it. She was really against it. Not super against it, but she was going to move. What was she going to do? Okay. But she wasn't keen on the idea. Okay, she wasn't keen on the idea. And she was leaving her friends behind in Lakeland and so forth, and everything she knew, her changing schools and so forth, and she was against it. But the strange thing now that they have moved and they've been there probably like 18 months or so, she loves it. She loves it now. Okay, she didn't know because children don't know what's good for them, but you as parents do know, and as a parent, you cannot pander to their every wants, every whim. You got to say, this is what God wants for us as a family. We are going to move. Okay. You can talk about the color of your bedroom, but we are going to move. Okay. Now, parents. So I have my mother live with me. She's 83. She's 83. She has Alzheimer's. She has Alzheimer's. So she's on a slow decline. Her body's healthy, but her mind is not always there. She's my responsibility. Okay, she's my responsibility. She lives with us. And so I live in the country. So guess where she lives? Okay? Because I'm responsible for her. Okay? There comes a change in your parents' life. Many of you have been there, where there's this switch where once they were your parents and you listen to them, and then there's this switch where you're in charge and they have to listen to you. Okay, they do. They have to listen to you, and because you're responsible for them. So, and if they want you to look after them, especially rather than end up in a nursing home, you're going to make an in-law apartment for them or a granny suite or something, or a room available in your country house, and you're going to take them with you because you're in charge. You're in charge. I tell you the story of King Asa and his mother Maacah and her apostasy, and how he dethroned her from her royal position because he was in charge, even though he was the son and she was the mother. He's saying, what you're doing is wrong. What you're doing is wrong. This is the way you should be living. And if you continue in that way, we're going to remove you. And he didn't allow respect or love for his mother to cloud his judgment. Okay? That story is found in 1 Kings chapter 15. You can read it at your leisure. Another example of this is found in the story of Gideon. Okay? Gideon gets called, does he not? Okay? Oh, you mighty warrior, go and save Israel. How can I save Israel when I am the least? And my father's house is at least in the tribe, or whatever. Okay? Remember that story? And then eventually, after all the signs, Gideon agrees to go. And what's the first thing the angel of the Lord tells him to do? To destroy the idol. Where was his idol? In his father's house. That was the first thing he had to do. The first battle he had to fight, even before he met the enemy, was to fight in his own house. Some of you know what it's about. And it came to pass that the same night that Lord said unto him, Take thy father's young bullock, even the second bullock of 7 years old, and throw down the altar of Baal that thy father have, and cut down the grove that is by it, and build an altar unto Lord thy God upon the top of this rock in the ordered place. And take the second bullock and offer a burnt sacrifice with the wood of the grove which thou shalt cut down. Then Gideon took 10 men of his servants and did as the Lord said unto him. And so it was, because he feared his father's household and the men of the city, that he could not do by day, that he did it by night. Okay? He still did it, even though he did it at night. He still did it. He made a point, he obeyed God. Okay? So even with our parents, even if they say, well, why are you moving to the country for? Why you want to live out in the boondocks for? Blah, 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 blah. You still got to do what God is telling you to do. And if they're your responsibility, you take them with you. If they don't like it, I have a friend who's in her plan, she's moving to Chile and she's bought a house in Chile. And her mother, her dad is dying. He's probably going to die before they move. But the mother, who's a lot stronger, she is already having to get her head around the idea that she's going to have to move to Chile. Okay? It's the way it is. Because her daughter's going to look after her. Okay? Now, all this, I keep on talking about this emotional preparedness. Emotional preparedness. We have to prepare spiritually for the end times. We have to prepare mentally. We have to prepare physically. And we have to prepare emotionally. This is part of the emotional preparedness, that there are some loved ones who will not make it, and some of the decisions are going to be hard. And remember the words of Jesus, he that loveth father or mother more than me is not worthy of me. He that loveth son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. Luke's version says this, if any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. Now, when you read the Luke version, it's very easy to be misunderstood. Okay, that, oh, you've got to hate these people. No, God is not really calling us to hate them. He's just asking us to love them less. Well, no, love him more than them. You can love them as much as you can, but still love him more. Mrs. White says it like this. Hate referred to in Luke 14:26 means a less degree of love. We ought to have supreme love to God, and our friends ought to be loved secondarily. Our love for husband, wife, brother, sister, father, or mother must be inferior to our love to God. Our love for these dear relatives must not be blind and selfish and cause us to forget God. When these ties of relationship lead us to prefer their favor by disregarding the truth, we love them more than we love Jesus and are not worthy of him. Now listen carefully, that last sentence. When these ties of relationship lead us to prefer their favor by disregarding moving to the country, the truth, we love them more than we love Jesus and are not worthy of him. We're not worthy of him. So, in summary, your plan A, pray and fast. Your plan B is to help God lead you to an alternative, just in case they do not come on board.
To be aware of new videos like this one, be sure to subscribe to the Preparing for the Time of Trouble channel. For more free videos and downloadable audio podcasts, as well as handouts, go to www.preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com. Topic categories include recordings of live seminar presentations, country living, sustainable gardening, homestead remedies, how to be self-sufficient when the grid goes down, wild edible and medicinal plants, hydrotherapy, and end-time Bible prophecies. To take advantage of these free resources, go to preparingforthetimeoftrouble.com.